Hello friends, for today's video I want to do a non-spoiler book review for what is, in my opinion, the most underhyped new fantasy release that I've picked up this year, and that would be Birth of a Dynasty. This is the first book in a trilogy, and I do think that this first book is in a lot of ways almost entirely set up for the next two books, which is, I think, initially going to sound like a con, but I actually am really excited at the amount of time that it took to set the scene, because already in the setting of everything and building this foundation, there's so much to sink your teeth into, and there's so much to be gripped by. In no way is the fact that this first book feels like setup, meaning that there aren't compelling character arcs, or there isn't a lot of political intrigue, or that you don't get a lot of really immersive and intricate world building. You get all of those things, but you can also see how this is going to be expanded upon, and you have guesses as to what's going to happen. But given that you already get a lot of twists and turns and betrayals within this first book, you can imagine just how much is in store for you in the next one. I want to elaborate on that in just a moment, but I also want to start by giving a general synopsis for this story. There are a wide variety of different perspectives over the course of that first book, but the two main ones would be Mukuru and Zecora. And Mukuru and Zecora's families, they are within a certain prophecy that says if they unite, it is likely going to result in the current ruling family to lose a lot of their power. And as such, it results in a lot of unfair and unjust things happening to Mukuru's family, and he ends up being the last surviving member. Because this puts a target on his back, he ends up disguising himself as just sort of this lowly person who lives in this rural area, and he goes by Khalil, not realizing initially that this identity he's taken on is actually the identity of somebody that will have political significance in the future. So while on one hand he's hiding an identity that has already a lot of political significance, he is taking on a new identity that does, and he is also starting to see, even though he's currently very, very young, he's seeing the way that if he just plays the long game and he takes his time, that he will have an opportunity to strike back, to avenge his family who was slaughtered, and he can do so from right under the noses of the people that are hunting him. Zecora, on the other hand, has been taken in by the current ruling family in somewhat of a hostage situation, and you're seeing the way that she recognizes that there are basically vipers at every corner and that she can't really trust anybody. And there are some interesting things, not just with her situation and all of the really intense intrigue that's going on, because she is a part of a scenario where there are a lot of concubines, and she's right in the midst of where all of the most powerful people are and how they're always vying for power. While all of that's happening, there are a lot of mysteries surrounding her own family, which you explore over the course of the story. It does have some implications into her and her position within her own clan, but also you're starting to piece together how maybe her plotline and Mukuru's plotline might intersect at some point. I mentioned that initially this story feels like in some ways this whole first book is entirely made up of setup, but that didn't bother me. And I wanted to elaborate on that point a little bit, because I know initially that doesn't sound like a pro, it sounds like a con actually. The reason that it excites me though is because it's not like we had an absence of interesting and compelling things happening over the course of this first book, but additionally, I do feel like I have to kind of acknowledge the time in which this book has come out and what else is popular right now versus what used to be common in fantasy, and what I would like for the genre to do moving forward, which I think this book does a lot of, which is if you're going to write a fantasy series, allow for the story to develop and for things to build. I think nowadays we actually are getting so many more fantasy standalones, and some authors are masters at writing a compelling story within one installment. I think Blood Over Brighthaven is a fantastic example of that. There are a lot of authors that are very gifted at writing a fantastic story with impactful themes, and you don't need anything more than that one book. But when we're fantasy fans, we oftentimes want to get to know the characters. We want the relationships between the characters, whether it's familial, whether it's romantic, whether it's friendships, whether it's enemies. We want them to have the time to develop. We want to watch them deepen over the course of the story, regardless of however many installments that is. We like watching how things develop and build. Additionally, because we love intricate world building, if we're going to get this story that is within a world where there's magic and there's prophecies and there's giants, all of these things art within Birth of a Dynasty. If you're going to get all of that, you want to, of course, dip your toes initially. You want to get some of that in these first books, but then you want to allow for those things to have time to breathe. And it can feel like maybe in this current age of fantasy releases that we, especially if you think about trope marketing, I think this is a perfect example with the whole enemies to lovers. And I know I've gone on many a tirade about how enemies to lovers, it doesn't even feel like we're getting what a lot of people actually want out of that, which is the idea of you have these people on opposing sides and they initially start out hating each other, disliking each other, being enemies, but then over the course of the story, they start to maybe see some validity and humanity in the other person, and they start to recognize that they are maybe products of their own environments, they help each other grow, they shape each other, they become better people because of each other, and then maybe that turns to attraction, and maybe that turns to love, and then maybe they want to fight against the forces that put them against each other, and that can be a recipe for a really fantastic story. But nowadays, because it feels like everything's got to come out so fast and we need everything to be a standalone, we need everybody to fall in love over the course of 50 pages, that it feels like everything happens so fast. And it almost speaks to kind of where we are, I feel like collectively, with even everything that we consume, where everything is being short form, people only read headlines. It just feels like everything's got to be immediate and everything's got to be quick. And I know for myself, I miss when I can just sit back and allow for something to develop over time, which is what I feel like this story is doing. I use the example of like enemies to lovers as an example of this thing happening really quickly, because you see that in marketing all the time. You're like, you're telling me these people are going to go from 0 to 100. They're going to go from I hate this person to I'd let the world burn for this person. Wow. I think we're so accustomed to seeing that these days. And it means that a lot of books feel purely like they're fun and they're entertaining, and that's not a bad thing necessarily, but it can become fatiguing when that seems as though it's the only thing that we're getting. And what I think this book is doing differently and that I'm excited about is it really just feels like it laid the foundation. The author had confidence in the story that they're telling. They already told a lot of things within this that had you on the edge of your seat. There were a lot of moments of like, oh, dang it, really? There's a lot of in a good way, where you're like, no, what? I thought, no. That reaction that a lot of us want out of our stories, there's definitely that within this first book. But I love that there didn't seem to be this feeling of I have to show my whole hand now. I'm actually going to keep some things close, and then I'm just going to pull you in, and I trust that you're going to let the story build over time. And I can't wait. If anything, I'm sad that it's only a trilogy is the projection, because I'm like, I feel like I could sit with this world and these characters for far longer than 3 books. And I think that is so exciting. I wouldn't necessarily categorize this, though, as epic fantasy. I definitely think it's high fantasy. But because it's somewhat contained to this area and these 3 main families, I don't think that necessarily the stakes and the scope are huge on the level of what we get in certain epic fantasy stories. But once again, that makes me even more excited for the amount of time that the author was taking to develop everything, because it just means that we don't need things to be that big in stakes to still allow for things to develop. I actually, because the characters start out very young, the 2 main perspectives, Mikuru and Sakura, because they start out really, really young, I kept waiting for the very beginning of the book to happen and then get a time skip, thinking, oh, okay, they're going to be, because they're about 11 and 8 years old at the beginning, respectively, for Mikuru and Sakura. So I kept thinking, okay, we're going to get the opening, the scene's going to be set, it'll establish things, and then there's going to be a time skip, and they're going to be adults, and then they're going to meet, and then things are going to play out from there. No. I mean, there's one minor time skip, but we actually watch them as children for the course of the entire story. There are adult perspectives that you get as well, and they're all kind of revolving around Mikuru and Sakura, which is why I still would say that Mikuru and Sakura are the main characters, even though you do get a lot of adult perspectives as well. But I was really surprised, and I actually kind of had to challenge my own expectations, because it's not that I was disappointed, but I did keep waiting. I kept being like, so when is the story going to start? And I was actually so happy that the author kind of subverted the expectation of that format of, okay, here's the beginning, in almost a prologue type way. Here's the beginning. Okay, now the story's gonna develop. It's like, no, I'm gonna take you through the course so that you understand why these characters want revenge so much, why their world is so cutthroat, why if a character thinks that this character over here is actually an ally, are they an ally or are they even worse than the person that they thought was an enemy? I'm going to take you through the course of that. And the other aspect of this is I would expect over the course of this trilogy for the characters to age up a little bit. But if they didn't and we just continued to watch things transpire the way they're transpiring, that's okay with me. If they did age up a little bit, great. It just means I'm getting to see them at every piece of their life in these really pivotal moments. And I think something like The Grace of Kings has a really bird's eye view, and maybe the way I'm talking about this one gives the impression that that's what this is like. I still felt close to the characters, even though I am getting these pieces of their life when they're young. I still felt very close to them, whereas something like Grace of Kings, it really did feel like snapshots over the course of decades, and sometimes through basically like godlike perspectives on occasion. That didn't really feel like what was transpiring here. There was always an attachment to these significant players on the board, and as a result there was a lot of intrigue, there was a lot of care, and also you do get both the villainous perspectives and our heroes of the story, but you can also see where are our heroes going to turn into villains in their own right? Are they going to unite, or are they going to turn out to be enemies? And the constant questioning of those things I thought was really exciting. I obviously thought it was fantastic. I think because of the nature of it being somewhat of a foundational sort of setup, I will say I don't know if I came away from it feeling necessarily the most impacted. I don't feel like the author ripped my heart out and smashed it into a million pieces necessarily, because I think the payoff is going to come later, and that's not bothersome to me whatsoever. That said, some people don't want to take that amount of time, and that's not a slight. That's not trying to be like, well, if you're impatient, then don't read this book or something. I genuinely recognize that sometimes that's not what everybody's looking for. Not everybody wants to have to read a whole series or wait for future installments to really feel like they're going to get those gut punches when there are those standalone books out there that accomplish those things really well. For me, I like all versions. I like the exciting and the fast-paced and one-and-done kind of stories, and I like the ones that take the time to develop and build. I think all sorts of fantasy stories serve purposes, and this one I feel like really accomplished that start of something great. And it actually makes for, as cheesy as it sounds, The Birth of a Dynasty is kind of the perfect title for all of that. I can't wait to see what the author does next in the second and third installments. I'm wondering if I'm going to have somewhat of a connection to this the same way I did the David Bod trilogy, because I feel like there are pieces of David Bod that did a lot of the things I'm describing similarly, but regardless, really can't wait. Can't wait to see what the author does next with this series. I think there are hopefully a lot of good things to come. As I noted at the very beginning, this is very, very underhyped. So if it sounds good to you, I highly recommend it. Please give it a go. I'll have it linked in the description bar in case you'd like to check it out. But anyway, thanks so much for watching. I hope you have a great rest of your day, and I'll see you later. Bye.